you got to be very. Now, I think some people, thank you, Trash Panamon, thank you guys for all the support. I think a lot of people are looking for the one book that's going to propel you to the next level, and that doesn't exist. There are chess books that are amazing and really, really good for various reasons, but if you want to improve genuinely, if you want to improve using chess books, you're going to have good experiences with books. You're going to have books that you read and they don't give you that much. Everybody has their own particular pathway, and you have to make a good faith effort, thank you for the 500 and the 100, Jesus, to engage with these books. And here's a couple of tips on engaging with chess books. So let's say let's say you want to improve your positional play in your 1500. Now there's a couple of specific recommendations I have. My all-time recommendation for club players on positional chess is a book called Chess Strategy for Club Players by Herman Gruden. That's an international master from the Netherlands. It's a long, big, thick book. I don't have it in print form, but it's a full compendium of positional concepts, phenomenal stuff. Of course, I've written a book on positional chess, far from the best, Mastering Positional Chess. There's also what I have at hand is the complete manual of positional chess. It's the 2-volume series. It's by 2 Russian grandmasters. It's a little bit mistitled because some of the chapters are on tactics. It's also basically an encyclopedia of positional concepts, but it's more fun. It's not as dry as an encyclopedia. And like the first volume is separated into part 1, the opening, part 2, the middle game, and the opening has the following chapters: advantage in development, the center and its significance, do not make unnecessary pawn moves if you have not completed your development. Then the middle game has chapters like prophylactic thinking, prophylaxis, schematic thinking, regrouping one's forces. Okay, so let's flip to a random section. This is in English. Schematic thinking. All right, so let's say you're reading a chess book. A lot of people, they go into the process of reading a chess book wanting to put a check mark next to the box that says I've read this book. And you want to keep in mind why you're reading the book. And you have to be reading the book with the express purpose of wanting to take as much information that's in the book and funneling it into your brain. I think I have been guilty of this, reading this book and patting myself on the back and saying, well, I read 30 pages today. Like, I read 40 pages of the Karpov book. Like, look at me. But then I would ask myself, well, who am I doing this for? And did I learn 40 pages worth of material, or did I just put a check mark next to it? And I always try to catch myself on that. So when you're reading a chess book, I like to use a physical board, but you can also use your computer. You can use a virtual board. You can use a Lee chess board. So let's say I'm using a chess-based board. You set up every position. So let's start reading. Chapter 15, schematic thinking, regrouping one's forces, transferring pieces to move to more favorable positions. Okay. Now, I always have a notebook with me when I'm reading books, chess books. And in the notebook, this is not my actual notebook, you would ideally write down, stuff that you find helpful, general conceptual stuff that you find helpful. Tips, maybe very instructive games. Another reason, instructive games you find in the book that you want to review later. You want to engage in many different ways with the book so that information persists in your brain. In positions that are not filled with tactics, one can often form short-term plans to fulfill strategic objectives. For example, a player may think, the rook would be good on that square, the knight on that one, and the bishop on this. Having thus determined his plan, he can choose the most accurate way of carrying it out. Okay, and the authors give the following position. And I've read this book before, so I've seen this position. Let me set it up for you guys, and then I'll give you guys this position as an exercise. It's not easy. This is like 1800 plus level, but still instructive. Okay, so this is from the game Geller, literally Polugayevsky against Geller. Riga 1958. Okay. Yes. Geller. Yes. Effing Geller. So, Polugayevsky Geller. And it's white to play in this position, and the authors write the following. So far, black has managed to contain White's central play. So far, black has managed to contain white's central play thanks to the blockade on e5. Okay, so the word blockade is important here. It's just like a pawn or a piece that's acting as a stopgap. But white retains the advantage because the knight on a5 is far away from the center. Okay, that makes sense. If it stood on d6 or e5 in the event of the pawns there being exchanged, black's position would be very pleasant. So a good way to engage with that sentence would be to say, okay, let me try to understand why would black's position be pleasant. So if you're doing this on a physical board, it's very easy to reposition the pieces. Okay, so let's imagine, a scenario where black's knight appears on e5. Like, does it make sense to me, you might ask, that black's position is very pleasant here? Well, it should make sense because this knight is amazing. It's an eternal knight. It's on an outpost, right? And it's pressuring c4. So clearly this is a positional gain for black. So this should make sense. And the same goes for d6. If black's knight could appear on d6, that's a beautiful blockading square. The knight is the best blockader. It immobilizes the d pawn. It pressures the e pawn. Okay, so this makes sense. So now they give white's move. And if you really want to take this to the next level, you would essentially play guess the move with most of these positions. You can read a chess book and not force yourself to try to find the move. But if you want, you can sort of cover the move with your hand and stuff. And some of the good books will have exercises for you at the end. Then you really don't have to do it. So the question is, how does Polugayevsky get things to happen in the center favorably? Because if he doesn't do anything, Geller's going to get his knight to d6, and he's going to stabilize the situation. So urgency is required. And urgency is required with respect to this e5 pawn. This is the pawn which white needs to target. I think that's pretty obvious from the position. How do we target that pawn? Can we do anything with our resources as they currently are? I'll give you guys a second to think about this. This is a very instructive position. Okay, it's white to move. So I'll give you guys a second to think. Yeah, and people are super sharp. I'm very happy to see this. The correct move is knight c1 exclamation mark. Yeah, knight c1 is a brilliant positional move. The knight transfers to d3, from where it strengthens the pressure on the key square e5. Once this blockading point will fall, black will be in trouble. At the same time, white's last move also opens the second rank, so his rook can transfer to the king side. Geller, desperado mode, f5. He tries to complicate the position, but Polugayevsky just goes knight d3 anyway. The key here is to target the e5 pawn. He doesn't care about that pawn. And after e takes f4 comes another very instructive move. Very instructive move. White to play. It seems like there's a lot going on here, but in reality there isn't. If you zero in on the key aspects of the position, beautiful. Great job. e5. If you have the tendency to recapture automatically, that might be something to notice. If e5 catches you by surprise, you might ask yourself why. Well, maybe it's because black, this requires the sacrifice of a pawn. It's quite clear that this is worth, these connected passers in the center is worth sacking a pawn over. But if this caught you by surprise, that would be a good thing to write on your notebook. Like, I have a tendency to recapture automatically. I'm going to try to fight that or whatever. So in this way, you make these observations, you learn this stuff. The game ends pretty quickly. Queen g5. Okay, so we attack the pawn. Very patient move by Polugayevsky. He doesn't have to rush with these pawns. The pawns will go eventually. Knight f4. Knight takes c4. Desperado knight sacrifice. And another very patient move. You could just take the knight and, you could win with the move d6 check. But Polugayevsky plays e6, advancing the pawn, intermediate move, attacking the bishop. Knight takes b2, e takes d7, attacking the rook, rook d8. And yet again, this is a game of intermediate moves. What does white do in this position? Do we take the knight, or is there a better move? Yeah, knight e6 is crushing. Knight e6 fork, queen f6. Now takes, boom, boom, boom. rook to d6 forced. Otherwise, this pawn would have promoted, knight b7. And the final move of the game, essentially, is what? Just, I mean, exquisite play by Polugajewski. Every move is precise. And this move wins. d6, and black resigns because in comes bishop c6 followed by d7 and d8. Okay. And they go on to the next position. So in this book, like, they don't spend too long on any one position, but they give a lot of instructive positions. Some books, they take the opposite perspective. They'll give 4 or 5 positions per chapter, but they'll spend, like, 3. The positions themselves will be more complicated. This is the Complete Manual of Positional Chess. It's a 2-volume series. And as Coder with a 10, damn girl. Coder, 10 gifted. This guy gifted 20 yesterday. He's a madman. Thank you, Coder. Damn girl. Wow, nice. Very, very nice. It's easy to understand when I explain it to you. Well, good books will do a good job explaining it to you. And, there's more complicated examples as the chapter goes along. So I want to give you guys, if you don't mind, one more example of this. Let me go back to the speedrun scene so I can set this up. I want to give you one more example of $5 from Don Seneca. Okay. So this is from the game Leko against Adams. Peter Leko against Michael Adams from 2002. So Leko Adams, and this is the same chapter, schematic thinking. Each white piece is more active than its counterpart, and one hardly needs to say anything about the pawn structure. Black's pawn structure is riddled with weaknesses. 2 paths are possible now, but the chosen in the game is the most technical and the most convincing over the board. After asking himself the question of which of his pieces can be improved further, Leko found the answer. Dean Madden, thank you for the prime. Now, that's a question I've asked many, many times during the speedrun. I've advocated that you ask it, but in some positions, it's hard. It's a hard question to answer. And certain positions can be very misleading because you look at all the pieces and it's hard to say which of the pieces needs to be improved. So I'll give you guys a second to think. But Leko finds a brilliant positional idea here, which I find this to be a very powerful example in many different ways. So let's think about this for a second. There's several good moves here. White is better, so there's not going to be just one good move, but I think he finds the best move. I'm going to eat a Ferrero Rocher as you guys are torturing over this position. Okay. So, this is very tough. All right, let's continue. Now, there's 2 main ideas that White can orchestrate here. Let's begin with the one that didn't happen in the game. I'm very impressed at how many people understood that g5 might be a very powerful pawn break. And the way to set this pawn break up is to move not bishop d3, but to move the bishop all the way back. That's the only good square. Now, why not c2? Because why would you put the bishop on a square where it's in the line of fire of the rook? Whoops, I cannot draw a single arrow. Instead, you want to go bishop b1. That is the move he didn't play. And as the authors explain, there is no satisfactory defense to the powerful threat of g5. Now, let's say you read this and you're saying, I don't get why g5 is so strong. Well, just play around. You can use the engine, but you can skip a move and say, okay, so if white plays g5, why is this so good? Okay, so you have to attack the knight. Black has to take. Okay, so white takes. King f8. Now let's say you're thinking here, okay, what does white do here? Well, what seems obvious in this position? I'll get to f4 in a second. Rook h8. Now that's not checkmate, but after king e7, you can give another check on e5. The point here is that you're trying to disattach the king from the rook. Do you have a way to disattach the king from the rook here? The move is very easy. The king is the worst defender. It is the easiest piece to check. The bishop comes back from the dead. Check on f5. King has to move up, and you win the rook. That's a pretty smooth line. Yeah, rook e7, exactly. That's right, man. So it's pretty easy to determine why g5 is devastating, and black is too tied up to do anything about it. Now, to the concept of f4. Why is f4 an inferior way to prepare g5? There's a couple of things to understand about using your pawns to prepare stuff. When you push a pawn, I can't emphasize this enough, you have to look at the squares that you weaken, right? And this creates a gaping hole on e4. Now you might say, well, I get it, but the bishop guards that square, but it's still a weak square. And even if black were to play knight e4 immediately, jettisoning a pawn, you would still... oh, actually, no, the bishop hangs. So true, you can't play knight e4. That's a good point. But how can black try to trade the bishops so that knight e4 becomes possible? What's a move that comes to mind here? So bishop d7 comes to mind. And you could very easily end up in a situation where you're allowing this central counterplay without having to. So this might be a good lesson. You might write down in your notebook, okay, when I move pawns, ask yourself which squares are weakened or which squares are accessible to my opponent's pieces, and try to prepare stuff in a way that doesn't weaken squares. But the move that Leko played is knight to c2. Incredible positional awareness. Now, where the hell is the knight going? That's even hard to say after you see this move. What he's trying to do is do a little switcheroo. He wants to bring the knight to e3, then move the bishop away, and then play knight f5, forking the king and the h6 pawn. So he started by identifying the weakness, which is the h6 pawn. And both of the correct solutions involve doing something with that weakness. This involves attacking it. No, I mean, this is hard. And Min found a very similar idea, knight a2, knight c3. So knight c2 exclamation mark. Rook to e8 by Adams. And Leko just ignores him. Knight e3. This rook is perfectly well defended. You don't need to do anything with it. Knight ce7, rook ce7. Now the king steps in to protect the rook. Notice how Adams how Leko is not going f4. He doesn't want to weaken the e4 square. He doesn't want to give black anything. After bishop c6, the bishop steps away. Leko has no choice but to go bishop d7, trying to cover the square. But now the other idea comes in, and Adams simply resigned. His position just collapses. Either this pawn is going to collapse, or he's simply going to get checkmated, much like we saw in the game. Right? So, and the line that he gives that that the authors give, by the way, after bishop c2, after bishop b1, they give bishop d7, and then just knight takes d5. So that's another thing to point out. So it's a super complicated idea, and I think what people fail to understand sometimes, they look at this and they say, not to put words in everybody's mouth, I feel like I'm doing that a lot. You might say, well, I would never find such an idea. So what's the purpose of reading about this? I understand this idea, like once you see it. I think everybody should understand this idea once you see it. How would you ever find something like that? How do you know that the knight is the piece that needs to be improved when it appears that the knight is precisely the strongest piece? It's tying black down to d5. So, and there's no good answer to that. But the more of these examples you see, the more of these maneuvers you acquaint yourself with, the likelier it is that you're going to pull yourself by the bootstraps. Eventually, you're going to see something like this yourself. And maybe you can make some insights about this. The knight is not doing enough. The knight is only doing one thing, and it's tying black down to d5. But you don't need to tie black down to d5. Black is already tied down. So the knight is redundant. It's like the flight engineer. You don't need the knight anymore on b4. Maybe it was serving a purpose at one point, but now it can see greener pastures. Cinderella, thank you. So you can spend 30 minutes on this one position and say, that's my reading for the day. Which is why when I have students, particularly kids, who say, how many pages did you read this week? 150. no way you retained even 5% of what's in those 150 pages. It can take you 2-3 months to read a book like this, and that's fine. You'll retain a lot more than somebody who reads it in a week. And we go for the G5 pawn because it's closer to the king. Yeah, because you can identify the king as being weak. It's weak because the pawn structure around it is bad. We've got major piece domination. Thank you, Cinderella. So it stems from that we might try to orchestrate attacking ideas. Yep. My System is another book that's like, it's like sipping absinthe or something. You got to do it slowly and you got to savor every drop. Or black caviar. Reading positional books is like the black caviar of chess. It's like you don't want to eat a whole sandwich full of it. You want to savor it bit by bit. Sorry to ramble so much, and you do this with every chapter. Space advantage. There's a lot of good stuff in this. Right? Naroditsky, same thing, but I don't really recommend Naroditsky for club players for the most part. Frictious asks, can you explain why advanced openings aren't recommended for beginners? I mean, at the beginner level, nobody knows 20 moves of theory. Anyway, yes, absolutely. So the simple reason is that is precisely what you say. To play those advanced openings well, you need to memorize a lot of theory. Why is that an inherent negative for a beginner? Because when you're a beginner, your goal is to master the principles behind the moves, not necessarily to memorize a bunch of moves. And openings like the Grunfeld require you to understand stuff to such a degree that you know when to violate the rules. Grunfeld gives up the entire center, so everything hinges on your ability to memorize all this theory, and you want to play openings where there's a little bit of memorization, but that stress concepts like the Queen's Gambit Declined, where you don't have to violate as many opening rules. I'm glad to hear that, Pickle Sardines. There's no one book for... Silman is good. I think Jeremy Silman is a little overrated. His Endgame book is really good, though. His Endgame book is phenomenal. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has turned out to be a much longer tutorial session than I expected. But I'm enjoying it. Well, I would say 45. I mean, if you just need to understand how much time per week you have. I mean... This is basic planning. Like if you have 3 hours to dedicate to chess a week, okay, maybe an hour of that will be reading. And perk, not really. I don't generally recommend the perk to anybody. Yes, playing a lot of bullet is definitely pernicious to beginners in the long run. How to Reassess Your Chess is good. It's a good book. It's not a must read, but it's a good book. Right, exactly, Desert Pago. That's exactly right. Well, at this point, I haven't studied chess too much, but a good amount. I used to study nothing crazy during my school years. I would train an hour a day or so, but I would do that over the course of many years. Yeah, so when you're a beginner, 15-minute is great, as long as you analyze your games. If you can analyze your games carefully, you will have a good time. You will derive a lot of benefit from it. Chess strategy for club players, I would say. Well, for people your level alone, yes. Now, another book that I'll recommend to everybody very heartily, and something that really flies under the radar. I can share some secrets in my laboratory. Yeah, Helston is great, but Helston is a little bit more advanced. That's for like 2,000 rated players. I'll be right back. So a couple of things. Martin Dvoretsky's disciple, Grandmaster Arthur Yusupov, has his very good book series, Chess Evolution. And another book that I've been really enjoying recently and using a lot for my students is Improve Your Chess Pattern Recognition. It's by a Dutch IM, who's a great, he's very reputable. 2014, so this book has been around. But man, this is like so full of really good material, which is well explained. And honestly, I love books that just have a lot of good examples. I like this format, 1 page per example, lots of good stuff you can really take away. and learn from. So that would be another recommendation. The more games you can funnel into your brain, the better. The more material you can marinate in, the better. Yeah, improve your chess pattern recognition. At some point, I'm going to make like a library of recommended books. I'm not there yet. No. I've talked about opening study, and I think that's actually a recipe for failure, to ignore opening study until you're 1800. Some of the recommendations are in the MooBot command, but it'll take me some time to assemble that library. I don't just want to like put random recommendations and stuff. And I still want to create courses and stuff, like there's so much that I want to do chess teaching wise. It's just that all of this requires like a lot of effort to assemble, and right now I'm just enjoying doing this stuff on stream. I think when I'm a little bit older, maybe a couple of years from now, I'll start focusing more on producing courses and sort of creating more of a legacy, but right now I'm just enjoying the impromptu kind of stuff. All right. Which one of the manual of positional chess? They're both good. Now, I would just read both. They're different. One builds on top of the other. Thanks, guys. This was a great instructional segment, I think. I had a great time. So yeah, complete manual of positional chess. And we're going to stream tomorrow for sure. I'm not sure exactly when. Thank you guys. This is awesome. I'm really happy to see how people are improving, and couldn't ask for a better crowd. So thank you guys.